My name is Marcel LeBlanc, and I've spent my whole life in New Orleans, where the air smells like jasmine and secrets. If you walk down Rue de Maine after midnight, past the iron lace balconies and flickering gas lamps, you'll come to a little perfume shop with a faded blue door. That's where Vangie Thibodeaux Vangie to those who knew her used to work her magic. Vangie wasn't just a perfumer. She was an artist who could capture memories in scent, the silk-kissed skin of a lover, the smoky sweetness of pralines burning in a cast-iron skillet, the damp earth of the bayou after rain. She could bottle it all. But the story I'm about to tell you isn't about the beautiful things she made. It's about what happened after her mother died. Celeste Thibodeaux was a healer. Folks came to her with their aches and heartbreaks, and she'd fix them with teas and tinctures brewed from things she gathered deep in the swamp. Until one evening, she sat down at her kitchen table, drank a cup of lavender tea, and never got up again. The coroner called it natural causes. Vangie knew better. The night they buried Celeste, the air clung hot and thick like wet wool. Vangie stood in her mother's workroom, running her fingers over the rows of glass bottles. Everything was exactly where Celeste had left it, the mortar still flecked with dried violet petals, the copper still warm from the last distillation. But the room smelled wrong. Beneath the usual notes of rosemary and vanilla, there was something sharp, metallic, like a knife hidden under a silk pillow. Vangie's nose twitched. She moved through the room like a bloodhound, following the scent until she found it a single teacup abandoned on the windowsill. The dregs had dried to a sticky film at the bottom. But when she lifted it to her face, the truth hit her like a slap. Nightshade. Not enough to taste, just enough to kill. Her hands didn't shake as she wrapped the cup in a linen cloth. People always underestimated how strong Vangie was. They saw her delicate hands and quiet smile and thought she was fragile as the glass bottles she worked with. They never noticed the way her eyes turned dark as Mississippi mud when she was angry. The next morning, she took the cup to old man Baptiste, who kept a pharmacy near the French market. He sniffed it once and recoiled. This didn't come from no tea bag, he muttered. Someone brewed this special. Vangie already knew who. There'd only been one visitor the day Celeste died, Margot Duval. With her too tight smile and hands that always seemed to be reaching for things that weren't hers. Margot, who'd been trying to buy the Thibodeaux property for years. Margot, who'd just opened her own herbal remedy shop 2 blocks away. That evening, Vangie stood outside Margot's shop, watching through the window as the woman laughed with a customer. The ruby ring on Margot's right hand caught the light as she poured tea, the same ring that had left a scratch on Celeste's counter the day she died. Back in her workshop, Vangie uncorked a vial of ambergris. The scent filled the room, minimal and ancient. She dipped a glass rod into the tincture and let a single drop fall onto her tongue. Revenge, she thought, should be personal. It should linger. And she knew exactly how to make sure it did. The attic above Vangie's perfume shop held the dense aroma of dried flowers and aged wood. Thin beams of moonlight slipped through the shutters, laying pale stripes across her work table. The teacup rested in the center, its lethal contents gone, but its story still etched into the porcelain. Vangie traced the rim with her thumb, imagining her mother's last sip from that cursed cup. Days of research had led her here. Nights spent poring over borrowed library books with crumbling pages had taught her about Nightshade and its properties. But her goal wasn't to replicate the poison. She needed something more subtle, more devious, something that would bring death. Without ever touching the killer's hands, the swamp held her answer. Before sunrise, when mist still clung to the water's surface, Vangie guided a pirogue through the bayou. The humid air vibrated with insect songs and the occasional splash of unseen creatures. She knew these waterways, these hidden places. Her mother's lessons about healing plants now served a darker purpose. Near a cluster of cypress knees, she found her prize. Black orchids glistening with morning dew, rare and potent. Old Creole women called them ghost flowers. Their nectar possessed a peculiar quality, one that drove snakes into a frenzy, pulling them toward the scent like moths to flame. Vangie carefully harvested 3 blossoms, their stems leaking sticky, shimmering sap. As she worked, a cotton mouth emerged from the murky water nearby, its head lifting, tongue testing the air. She froze. The snake studied her with cold, black eyes before sliding away into the shadows. Back in her workshop, the delicate process began. The orchid nectar required careful distillation to preserve its unique properties. She blended it with jasmine, oil, sweet and unassuming, the kind of fragrance a woman like Margot would wear without suspicion. For the perfume space, she needed something intimately connected to her target. A monogrammed handkerchief Margot had left behind weeks ago provided the solution. Vangie burned the fabric's edge, collecting the ashes, mixed with bourbon and salt. It became a personalized tincture, a scent signature no one else would possess. The final component proved most dangerous to acquire. She needed venom, not as poison, but as lure. The cottonmouth from the swamp now occupied a wire cage in her workshop. Vangie carefully provoked it to strike at a leather-covered dish, collecting the droplets that fell from its fangs. The snake watched her with ancient eyes, as if comprehending its role in her plan. Time lost meaning as the perfume took form. In its bottle, it appeared harmless, golden and shimmering. A test on her own skin proved its effectiveness when a garden snake emerged from the floorboards within minutes. Drawn to the scent, her pulse quickened. It worked. Now came the delivery. Margot's upcoming birthday provided the perfect opportunity. The invitation arrived as formal courtesy between business rivals. Vangie accepted without hesitation. On the evening of the party, she chose a modest gray dress that wouldn't attract attention. The perfume bottle sat heavy in her pocket, its glass warming against her thigh. Margot held court in her townhouse, surrounded by crystal and candlelight, her ruby ring flashing as she greeted guests. Vangie waited until the party reached its peak, until champagne had loosened tongues and laughter filled the rooms. Then she approached Margot. With carefully crafted smile, she presented the bottle as a gift, something special crafted just for her. Margot removed the stopper and inhaled deeply. Her eyelids fluttered momentarily. She declared it exquisite and applied it to her throat immediately, complimenting Vangie on inheriting her mother's talent. Vangie's smile never faltered as she agreed. Outside, the first of the cottonmouths began their journey from the sewers, their skilled bodies gliding over cobblestones as they followed the intoxicating trail through the thick night air. The night air hung thick over New Orleans, carrying the scent of magnolias and river mud. Vangie stood on the balcony of her shop, watching the flickering gas lamps along the rail. Below her, the party at Margot's townhouse spilled laughter and music into the street. The perfume had been delivered, the trap had been set. Now came the waiting. She turned back inside, where the remnants of her work lay scattered across the table. The empty vial that had held the perfume, the stained cloth from wiping her hands, the wire cage where the cottonmouth had rested before she released it back into the swamp. Each piece told a story, but only she knew how they connected. Across town, Margot Duval moved through her party like a queen holding court. The ruby at her throat caught the candlelight as she laughed at some joke, her fingers brushing unconsciously against the spot where she dabbed Vangie's gift. The scent had already begun working its magic. Though she didn't know it yet, Vangie had calculated everything. The warmth of the crowded room would help diffuse the perfume's aroma. The open windows would carry traces outside, creating a scent trail, and the alcohol everyone drank would make them slower to notice what slithered in from the night. The first snake appeared near the champagne table, a slender water moccasin. Drawn by something none of the party guests could smell, a waiter nearly stepped on it before noticing the dark shape coiled near the table leg. His scream cut through the music. Chaos erupted. Guests scrambled back as more snakes appeared. A ribbon snake twined through the wrought iron railing of the staircase. A fat cottonmouth slid from beneath a potted fern. They moved with purpose, their tongues flicking the air, all heading in the same general direction. Margot stood frozen near the center of the room, her face draining of color as she realized the snakes weren't randomly appearing. They were coming toward her. The perfume at her pulse points called to them like a dinner bell. Vangie wasn't there to see it, but she could imagine it perfectly. The way Margot's hands would tremble as she backed away. The moment of horrified realization when she understood this wasn't some freak accident. The instant she smelled her own wrists and recognized the jasmine scent now mingled with something darker, something primal. Back in her workshop, Vangie lit a single candle. The flame danced in the still air as she methodically cleaned her tools. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. Someone had called for help, too late. Of course, by the time authorities arrived, the snakes would have dispersed, slithering back to their hiding places. And Margot, Vangie didn't need to wonder. She knew how much venom a full-grown cottonmouth could deliver in a single strike. Knew how quickly the toxins would spread through the bloodstream when injected near a major. Iris knew, most importantly, that there would be no trace left behind except some snake bites and a tragic accident at a Mardi Gras party. She blew out the candle and sat in the dark, listening to the distant sirens. Somewhere across the city, her mother's killer was learning the price of crossing a Thibodeaux woman. The lesson wouldn't last long, but it would be unforgettable. Tomorrow, the city would whisper about the bizarre snake attack at Margot Duval's party. Some would call it bad luck. Others would mutter about curses. Vangie would say nothing at all. She had a shop to open, customers to serve, and a new perfume to create. This one would smell like justice. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Vangie's apartment above the perfume shop, painting delicate patterns across the wooden floor. She sat at her small breakfast table. The local newspaper spread before her. The headline screamed about last night's tragic incident at the Duval mansion. Though the details remained vague, authorities were calling it a freak occurrence, a bizarre convergence of snakes during a party. Vangie sipped her chicory coffee, the bitter taste lingering on her tongue as she read between the lines. Downstairs, the bell above the shop door jingled. Customers had started arriving earlier than usual, drawn by morbid curiosity and the need to gossip. Everyone wanted to discuss the shocking events. And where better than at the perfume shop owned by the victim's business rival? Vangie smoothed her dress and descended the stairs, her face arranged into an expression of polite concern. The shop buzzed with whispered conversations. Women clustered around the display cases, their voices hushed but excited. Did you hear about Margot? They asked each other. Such a strange tragedy. Vangie moved among them, offering samples, making recommendations, all while listening carefully to every word. Madame Leclerc, one of her regular customers, cornered her near the rosewater display. The older woman's eyes gleamed with the thrill of sharing scandalous news. They say she was bitten 7 times, Madame Leclerc confided. The doctors couldn't stop the swelling. Her throat closed up. Vangie nodded sympathetically, her hands steady, as she measured out a dram of lavender. All by noon, the story had grown in the telling. Some claimed Margot had been surrounded by dozens of snakes. Others whispered that the creatures had seemed almost purposeful in their attack. A few superstitious souls crossed themselves and muttered about curses and bad luck. Vangie continued, working, measuring, mixing, bottling, her movements precise and unhurried. That evening, as she closed the shop, a police detective arrived. He introduced himself as Inspector Laurent, a tired-looking man with ink-stained fingers and a persistent cough. He asked routine questions about her whereabouts the previous night. About her relationship with Margot, Vangie answered calmly. She had been home alone, working on a new fragrance. Yes, she and Margot had been competitors, but there was no bad blood, at least none that anyone could prove. The inspector studied her carefully before leaving with a polite nod. Vangie watched from the window as he walked down the street, stopping to speak with other shop owners. She wasn't worried. She had left no trail, no evidence, just a beautiful perfume bottle, now empty, that would likely be discarded as irrelevant to the investigation. That night, she dreamed of her mother. Celeste stood in her apothecary, surrounded by drying herbs, her hands busy with some mysterious concoction. When she turned to Vangie, she didn't speak, but her eyes held both sorrow and understanding. The dream faded with the first light of dawn, leaving Vangie with an aching chest and cold sheets. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. The shop grew busier as news of the tragedy spread. Some customers came out of genuine sympathy, others from curiosity. A few competitors eyed Vangie with new wariness, wondering if her sudden rise in popularity might make her the next target of misfortune. At the end of the week, a letter arrived from Margot's lawyer. Vangie turned the heavy envelope in her hands before breaking the seal. Inside were documents transferring Margot's remaining stock of rare essences and oils to Vangie's shop, along with a note explaining it had been specified in Margot's will. A final gesture of professional respect, the letter claimed. Vangie placed the paperwork on her desk, her fingers tracing the embossed letterhead. She wondered when Margot had made these arrangements. Before the party, after receiving the perfume, the thought sent an unexpected chill down her spine. That evening, she walked to the riverfront. The Mississippi rolled dark and endless under the moonlight. She opened the small bottles she'd brought with her, the last drops of the special perfume, and let the contents fall into the water. The current swallowed them instantly, carrying them away to the Gulf. When she returned home, she lit every lamp in the workshop and began a new batch of perfume. This one would be different. Lighter, cleaner, something to chase away the shadows that had gathered in the corners of the shop. As she worked, the scent of citrus and fresh herbs slowly replaced the lingering memory of jasmine and orchids. The next morning, she placed the new fragrance in the shop window with a simple label, Celeste, the first customer to try. It sighed with pleasure, remarking how it smelled like forgiveness. Vangie merely smiled and rang up the sale. The rain fell steady and warm on New Orleans, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected the flickering gas lamps. Vangie stood at her shop window watching the droplets chase each other down the glass. 2 weeks had passed since Margot's death, and the city had moved on to fresher scandals. But in the quiet moments, when the shop emptied and the shelves stood still, Vangie felt the weight of what she had done settle around her shoulders like a too heavy shawl. A knock at the back door startled her from her thoughts. The rhythm was familiar, 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. Only one person knocked like that. She unlocked the door to find Jacques, the chemist, standing hunched against the rain, his spectacles fogged with humidity. Without speaking, he handed her a newspaper folded to a small article near the back. The coroner's report had been released. Death by snake venom, the paper stated. But the official ruling was accidental. No signs of foul play, no mention of perfume. Vangie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Jacques took the paper back and burned it in her sink. Watching as the flames turned the words to ash, they sat at her work table drinking strong coffee. Jacques didn't ask questions, and Vangie didn't offer explanations. But when he left, he pressed a small vial into her hand. A new compound, he said, something to help her sleep. She pocketed it with a nod, knowing she wouldn't use it. Her dreams were the one place her mother still visited her, and she wouldn't trade those moments for all the restful nights in the world. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Margot's niece, a sharp-eyed girl of 22 named Lisette. She arrived as Vangie was opening the shop, her morning dress stark against the colorful storefronts of the French Quarter. Without preamble, she placed a leather-bound ledger on the counter. "My aunt's client list," she said. "They should be yours." No, Vangie hesitated before accepting the book. Margot had kept detailed notes on her customers' preferences, their allergies, their secret desires. It was a perfumer's gold mine, and Lisette was handing it over without condition. When Vangie asked why, the girl merely shrugged. "She admired your work," she said, "and she would have wanted her clients taken care of properly." After Lisette left, Vangie spent hours poring over the ledger. Margot's handwriting slanted aggressively across the pages, her notes surprisingly insightful. Here was a judge's wife who favored vetiver to mask the scent of laudanum. There a brothel madam who ordered rose absolute by the pint. And on the last page, a single entry that made Vangie's breath catch: Celeste Thibodeaux. Beside her mother's name, Margot had written only 2 words: Nightshade, regret. The ledger fell from Vangie's hands. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. All this time she had believed Margot killed without remorse. But those 2 words suggested something far more complicated. Had her mother known Margot? Had there been some history between them? The questions swarmed like hornets. But there was no one left to answer them. That night, Vangie dreamed differently. This time her mother stood in a strange room, Margot's workroom, though Vangie had never seen it. The 2 women faced each other across a table cluttered with bottles. They were arguing, their voices too muffled to hear. Celeste reached for something. Margot grabbed her wrist. And then the dream dissolved into smoke. Vangie woke with her heart pounding. The first light of dawn crept through her window, turning the perfume bottles on her dresser into glowing jewels. She dressed quickly and walked to St. Louis Cemetery as the gates opened. At her mother's tomb, she placed a single white gardenia, Celeste's favorite flower, and stood in silence as the sun climbed higher. Back at the shop, she made a decision. She would create one final perfume in Margot's honor, not something venomous or vengeful, but a true tribute, something that captured the woman's complexity, her ambition, her unexpected remorse. She worked through the day and into the night, blending notes of black pepper and amber, blood, orange and myrrh. When it was finished, she bottled it in simple glass and labeled it simply Lisette. The next morning, she delivered it to Margot's niece with no explanation. The girl opened it, inhaled, and her eyes filled with tears. "It smells like her," she whispered, "like really her." Vangie walked back to her shop through streets just waking up. The air smelled of baking bread and fresh coffee, the ordinary miracles of a new day. She unlocked her door, turned the sign to open, and began preparing for whatever customers might come. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, that was still hers to shape. One careful drop at a time. The heat wave that settled over New Orleans made the air thick as syrup. Vangie wiped her forehead with the back of her hand as she ranged new bottles in the shop window. The glass felt warm under her fingertips, heated by the relentless sun. Business had been steady since Margot's passing, with curious newcomers mixing with loyal customers in a constant stream through her door. She was measuring out sandalwood oil when the bell above the door chimed. A woman entered. Her dress the deep purple of twilight, her silver hair coiled in an elaborate braid. She moved with the quiet assurance of someone accustomed to respect. Vangie knew her by reputation only. Madame Desmarais, the most sought-after voodoo priestess in the quarter. Madame Desmarais examined the shelves without speaking, her fingers hovering just above the bottles as if reading their energy. When she finally approached the counter, she placed a small velvet pouch before Vangie. Inside were dried leaves that smelled faintly of earth and something metallic. For protection, Madame Desmarais said, "The spirits whisper that you walk between worlds now." Vangie started to protest, but the older woman silenced her with a look. The dead do not rest when justice is unbalanced. She tapped the pouch meaningfully before turning to leave. Vangie tucked the pouch under her counter and settled by the encounter. She had never put stock in spirits or magic, preferring the tangible science of scent. But that night, as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she could have sworn she heard whispering from the shop below. When she investigated, she found only empty rooms and the faint trace of Jasmine lingering near the door. The next morning brought another unexpected visitor. Lisette arrived carrying a wooden box inlaid with Mother of Pearl. She set it on the counter with a thud. "I found this in my aunt's private rooms," she said. "I think you should have it." Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with faded ribbon. The top one bore Celeste's handwriting. Vangie's hands trembled as she lifted it. The date placed it just weeks before her mother's death. As she read, a strange tightness formed in her chest. The letter spoke of a disagreement between her mother and Margot, but not the bitter rivalry Vangie had imagined. They had been friends. Once, close once, the argument had been about business ethics, about how far was too far when creating remedies. The final lines made Vangie's vision blur. You know what you propose is dangerous. Her mother had written, if you proceed, I cannot protect you from the consequences. Vangie spent the afternoon reading every letter, piecing together a story she never knew. Margot and Celeste had been partners before they were competitors. They had dreamed of opening a proper perfumery together. But Margot had grown impatient with the slow pace of herbal remedies, wanting faster results, stronger effects. The rift between them had deepened until that final, fatal disagreement. That night, Vangie dreamed again. This time she saw her mother brewing tea, her face drawn with worry. Margot entered, holding a small vial. They argued, voices rising. Margot poured the vial's contents into the teapot when Celeste turned away. But as she did, her hands shook. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. Vangie woke with a gasp. The clock showed 3:33. That liminal hour when the night feels thinnest. She lit a lamp and carried it downstairs to the shop. In the dim light, she mixed oils blindly, letting her hands work without conscious direction. When she finally looked down, she had created something new, a fragrance that smelled like forgiveness and regret, like second chances never taken at dawn. She walked to the river. The water moved sluggishly in the morning heat. She dropped the new perfume into the current along with the velvet pouch of leaves. Then she stood watching until the last ripple faded. Back at the shop, she placed a new sign in the window, Thibodeaux and Duval Perfumery. It read, Estate, 1893. The date was wrong by years, but the sentiment was true enough. Lisette would join her as apprentice next week, carrying on both their families' legacies. The first customer of the day paused to read the sign before entering. She asked for something light, something hopeful. Vangie reached for a bottle of orange blossom and bergamot, her fingers steady now. As she wrapped the purchase, she noticed the air in the shop had changed. The scent of jasmine was gone. In its place was something fresher, something like morning after a long night. The scent of fresh paint mixed with the usual perfume aromas as Vangie stepped back to examine the newly lettered shop window. Thibodeaux and Duval Perfumery gleamed in gold leaf. Catching the afternoon sun, Lisette stood beside her, arms crossed, head tilted as she studied their handiwork. The girl had proven to be a quick study in the weeks since joining the shop, her hands steady when measuring delicate oils, her memory sharp for customer preferences. As shadow fell across the freshly painted name, Inspector Lawrence stood on the sidewalk, his hat in his hands, his expression unreadable. He had come by the shop several times since Margot's death, always with polite questions that lingered just a little too long. Today, he carried a small notebook that flipped open with a practiced flick of his wrist. He asked about the business changes, about Lisette's involvement, about why Vangie would partner with the niece of her former rival. His tone remained professional, but his eyes missed nothing as they darted around the shop, noting the new arrangement of shelves, the different perfumes displayed prominently. Vangie answered evenly. Business was business. Lisette had talent. The past should stay in the past. The inspector scribbled notes, his pen scratching against paper in a rhythm that set Vangie's teeth on edge. When he left, he paused at the door, looking back with an expression that might have been pity or suspicion. Lisette let out a breath only after his footsteps faded down the street. That evening, as Vangie closed the shop, she found a single gardenia on her back step. No note accompanied it, just the white bloom resting against the worn wood. She brought it inside, placing it in water, watching as the petals slowly unfurled in the lamplight. The scent reminded her of her mother's garden, of simpler times before poisons and revenge. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams of snakes and teacups gave way to stranger visions. Her mother and Margot as young women, laughing together in a field of wildflowers. They pressed petals between book pages, bottling summer scents, their faces unlined by time or betrayal. Vangie woke with tears drying on her cheeks, and the gardenia's perfume heavy in the room. The next morning brought Lisette early, her arms full of ledgers and notebooks from Margot's estate. "We should combine our recipes," she said without preamble. "Create something new from the best of both." Vangie hesitated only a moment before clearing space at the work table. As they worked, comparing formulas, adjusting measurements, something unexpected happened. Margot's notes revealed a brilliance Vangie had never acknowledged in life. Her combinations were daring, her techniques innovative. The rivalry between their families had blinded Vangie to the woman's true talent. Now, studying the notebooks, she felt a pang of regret for what might have been if things had gone differently. Lisette proved equally surprising. The girl had her aunt's instinct for bold pairings, but tempered it with Celeste's respect for tradition. Together, they created 3 new perfumes before the afternoon light faded. The last one, a blend of honeysuckle and vetiver with a whisper of something indefinable, made them both pause when they sniffed the tester strip. "It smells like them," Lisette said softly. "Like they're standing right here." Vangie could only nod, her throat too tight for words. That night, she walked to the cemetery again. This time, she brought 2 bottles, one for her mother's grave, one left near Margot's tomb. The moonlight made the glass gleam like liquid silver as she removed the stoppers, letting the fragrances mingle with the night air. On her way home, she passed Inspector Lawrence standing under a gas lamp. He tipped his hat, but said nothing as she walked by. When she glanced back, he was still watching her, his face in shadow. The shop bell jingled the next morning to reveal Madame Desmarais waiting at the counter. She smelled the air appreciatively before speaking. "The spirits are quieter now," she said. "They approve of your choices." She purchased a bottle of the new honeysuckle perfume and left without another word, her purple skirts whispering against the floorboards. Vangie turned the open sign just as the first real customers arrived, women from the neighborhood. Regulars, who had known both her mother and Margot, came to see the changes for themselves. They exclaimed over the new perfumes, marveling at how familiar they seemed. How they carried echoes of 2 women who had shaped the quarter in their own ways. As the day wore on, Vangie noticed a change in the air. The shop felt lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from its corners. Even the sunlight seemed to fall differently through the windows, gilding the perfume bottles in a warmer glow. When the last customer left, Vangie and Lisette sat together at the work table, tired but satisfied. Outside, the sounds of the quarter carried through the open door, children laughing, carriage wheels on cobblestones, the distant call of a street vendor. Ordinary sounds, healing sounds. Lisette reached across the table, squeezing Vangie's hand briefly before returning to her. Notes, no words were needed. The perfumes they had created today spoke for them both, of loss and reconciliation, of past mistakes and future possibilities. Vangie looked around the shop, at the bottles gleaming in the fading light, at the new sign, visible through the window. For the first time in months, she felt something like peace settle over her. There would be more challenges ahead, more ghosts to reckon with, but for now, in this moment, the scales felt balanced. The morning of the 1-year anniversary of Celeste's death dawned gray and quiet. Vangie stood at her bedroom window watching the mist curl over the rooftops of the French Quarter. The shop below remained dark, closed for the day. She had promised Lisette they would take this day to remember, to honor, to finally let go. Downstairs, the perfume bottles stood in silent rows, their contents catching what little light filtered through the curtains. The new creations shared space with the old, now their labels bearing both the Thibodeaux and Duval names. The shop smelled different these days, less like grief and more like hope, with top notes of citrus and spice layered over deeper, more complicated accords. Lisette arrived just past 8, carrying a basket of warm baked nuts and 2 cups of strong coffee. They ate in comfortable silence at the work table, the steam from their cups mingling with the morning chill. When the last crumb had been brushed away, Lisette reached into her bag and produced a small wooden box. Inside lay a single key. "The house on Dauphine Street," she said, "and Will left it to me." But I think it should be yours. It was where she worked on her special formulas, where she kept her private journals. Vangie turned the key over in her palm, feeling its weight, its history. The walk to Dauphine Street took them past familiar landmarks. The bakery where Celeste used to buy morning buns. The corner where Margot had always stopped to chat with the flower vendor. The house itself stood slightly apart from its neighbors, its pale blue shutters beaded by years of sunlight. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the air smelled of dried herbs and dust, with an underlying note of something sweet and forgotten. Margot's workroom remained exactly as she had left it. Notebooks stacked neatly on shelves, bottles ranged by scent category, a small copper still gleaming dully in the corner. Vangie moved through the room slowly, her fingers trailing over surfaces. She paused at a particular shelf where a single notebook lay apart from the others, its cover embossed with a gardenia design. Inside, she found not formulas or recipes, but letters. Letters to Celeste, written but never sent. The dates spanned years. Early pages spoke of shared dreams and plans. Later ones carried the weight of their growing disagreement. The final entry, dated the day before Celeste's death, contained only a few lines. I was wrong. Meet me tomorrow. Bring the tea. Vangie closed the book carefully. The pieces settled into place with quiet finality. Margot had meant to reconcile. The tea had been meant as peace offering, not poison. Somewhere along the way, something had gone terribly wrong. Lisette found her sitting on the floor, the notebook in her lap. She didn't ask what Vangie had read. She simply sat beside her, their shoulders touching. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, they worked until dusk packing up Margot's supplies. The notebooks and tools would go to the shop, where they could be put to good use. The personal items, a hairbrush, a shawl, a collection of seashells, Lisette set aside to keep. Only the gardenia notebook remained unclaimed, its pages holding truths too heavy for either of them to carry a lone dot at the river's edge. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Vangie opened the notebook one last time. The pages fluttered in the breeze like wings. Then she let it go, watching as the current carried Margot's words away, toward the sea, toward whatever peace might wait beyond this world. Lisette slipped her hand into Vangie's as they walked back through the gathering dark. The streets of the quarter glowed with lantern light, their reflections shimmering in the evening puddles. Somewhere nearby, a piano played a slow, sweet melody. The next morning, the shop reopened as usual. Customers came and went, sampling new fragrances, admiring the expanded selection. No one remarked on the small changes. The gardenia plant now blooming in the window. The portrait of two women that hung behind the counter, their faces forever young, forever smiling. When the last customer had gone and the shelves were restocked, Vangie and Lisette sat together at the work table. Between them lay a blank notebook, its pages waiting for new stories, new formulas, new dreams. Vangie opened it to the first page and wrote in careful script, "For those we carry with us." Then she dipped her pen again and began their first shared creation. The ink flowing as smoothly as the river, as endless as memory. Outside, the rain began to fall, gentle and forgiving, washing the streets clean at last.